Mrs. Smith is the Montgomery County, Maryland chapter chair for Moms for Liberty.
I would like to address, too, the lie that parental groups and Moms for Liberty are book banning. If removing a sexually explicit book from school libraries is what you see as book banning, then we need to reevaluate our language.
More than 7 months ago, our Republican colleagues sat in this hearing room and vehemently denied any interest in addressing the banning of books. Then House Republicans passed a bill they said was about parental rights, but in fact should be called the Politics Over Parents Act because it is essentially a blueprint for book banning. Now today, the majority is holding a hearing specifically about what books should or should not be allowed in school libraries, and I'll note that this is the U.S. Congress, not a school board meeting.
In a week that saw House Republicans failing to elect a speaker multiple times over, the GOP pulled a fast one in the House Education and Workforce Subcommittee. One of the Republican invited witnesses was Lindsey Smith, a chapter leader of Moms for Liberty in Montgomery County, Maryland. She was welcomed by the GOP with open arms to discuss, quote, explicit content in school libraries.
The subcommittee hearing today is to hear testimony to examine the prevalence of inappropriate content in libraries in schools. The Biden administration is troubling response and state and local level solutions.
It's my honor to introduce Mrs. Lindsey Smith. She worked as a nurse for 15 years until 2 years ago when she became a full-time at-home mom. She is the mother of 4, author of 2 books, 45 Days of Prayer and Daughter of the King, and she is usually found on a sporting field supporting her kids. Thank you so much for the work you're doing and for being our witness.
I would not expect my child to walk into one of your homes and be able to easily access Playboys or pornographic photos. Yet here we are today discussing the argument of these kind of books being accessible in our public schools library, all in the name of education. Instead of education being the focus, we have completely lost our focus, and now we have an issue of sexually explicit books being accessible to children 3 years and older. Books easily available to children within their own school media centers. One example is an innocent-looking book with bright colors and a puppy dog on the front. To a 3 or 4-year-old, this book is appealing to them, yet the language of this book is far from appropriate. In the Hide and Find glossary, 3 to 4-year-olds are encouraged to find images of leather, drag queen, and underwear. I want you to imagine very briefly with me that your 3-year-old son, with a speech delay, who is in the school for a language delay, comes home with this book and also read it out loud in class. This was my story and one of the reasons I am here before you today. When I found out this was available to my youngest son and would be used as curriculum, this mom began to speak up. Genderqueer is just one of the many examples that parent groups and so-called book banners actually are speaking up against. The sexually explicit and detailed content does not belong in our schools, and we are here asking you to hold the very laws and policies that were created on the very local level. We don't show porn in the name of education to children, and children as young as 3, like my son, were exposed to these books. What will start as library books will flow into the classrooms.
Research shows that as of 2021, more than 4 million students had their freedom to read curtailed because of book bans. That includes students across more than 5,000 schools, 138 school districts in 32 states. Specifically, PEN America found that 41% of banned content focuses on LGBTQI+ themes, protagonists, or characters. 40% focuses on characters of color. Rates of teachers citing burnout and what they feel are unsafe working conditions as a reason for leaving the profession have skyrocketed. At least 7 states have passed draconian laws in the past 2 years, subjecting school librarians to years of imprisonment and fines for providing books deemed to be explicit, obscene, or harmful. That's incarceration. These censorship laws are being enacted by extreme MAGA politicians under the pretext of parental rights, when in reality, it's a coordinated and apparently well-funded vocal minority of parents and conservative organizations pushing their personal agenda on others. We can all agree that books in school libraries should be age appropriate. And we all used to agree that the federal government should not dictate school curricula or what books are in school libraries. Regrettably, it seems that my Republican colleagues have abandoned these previously shared values, although I do note that Superintendent Degenfelder expressly says in her testimony, so how do we solve this issue? It certainly should not be up to the federal government. A book's age appropriateness and its ability to tell challenging, culturally significant stories representing diverse perspectives, those are not mutually exclusive. For example, The Hate U Give is a powerful novel taught in middle and high schools about a young black girl who finds her voice and stands up for racial justice as she grapples with the trauma of witnessing her friend being murdered by police officers. This important book elevates black voices and centers a historic civil rights struggle, but it's been challenged by Republican officials and parents in at least 4 states. I want to remind my colleagues that it is students who are most affected by these policies. Republicans talk about the danger of exposing students to books they deem inappropriate because of their personal values or preferences. But we really need to highlight the danger of ignoring, or worse, erasing history by removing school library books that portray representations of marginalized people, culture, or experiences. Books like Homegoing and The Kite Runner, those are outstanding sort of modern-day works of historical fiction. Books like All Boys Aren't Blue, a captivating memoir. It's affirming for young LGBTQ readers, especially those who are black.
Can you just expand briefly upon the potential impacts of banning books? You know, in Florida, Roberto Clemente, I mean, he's a god, and that was put aside for a while. Certain poetry. Our superintendent of public education in Arizona, Tom Horn, feels that we shouldn't talk about race at all because it offends some. And that way, we don't have to talk about history because it's part of the story. And so my question is, tell them how it impacts students and communities.
Our schools are becoming more diverse, and research shows that young people are going to be more engaged in learning in schools when their libraries and the books that they have ready access to reflect their identities, reflect their families, reflect a range of their life experiences, deal with the complexities of the lives that they're living. And the purpose of a library is, in fact, to be that kind of wellspring of information. That's what school librarians are charged with doing. They're not charged with exercising a kind of censorious mindset about how different people in the community might feel about one content or other. They're charged with producing a robust, diverse collection. And that's what's critical.
Yeah, and I think, and I asked that question because the efforts, at least in my home state and led by the superintendent then and now again superintendent, has to do more with the discussion today is about protecting children, the title, from explicit sexual content. But content is also the issue. And could you talk about examples where banning has to do with the content about what you disagree with, an idea, a point of view, versus trying to twist ourselves into a pretzel to try to fit the PICO decision in terms of a definition of banning?
I think it's just quite clear, and you really cannot separate the facts of what's been going on around the country for the past years in terms of how many stories there are of people who are trying to remove books and being successful at removing books that are about black stories by black authors about LGBTQ lives. You cannot pretend that is not happening. There are stories in the news. There was a story just this week in Iowa about hundreds of books being removed under one of these laws. And that's been the theme for the past 2 years.